Story number 1. The Wanderer and the Snowstorm. Winter in northern Montana was unforgiving. The relentless snowstorms that swept through the Rocky Mountains could isolate even the most seasoned residents, cutting off communication and access for days on end. Our small village of Silver Ridge was nestled against these formidable peaks, a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's names and stories. But nothing could have prepared us for the night the snowstorm brought more than just fierce winds and blinding snow. I'm Mark Carter, the patriarch of the Carter family. My wife, Linda, our teenage son, Jake, and our young daughter, Lily, were all I had. We lived in a modest wooden cabin on the outskirts of Silver Ridge, a place that offered both solitude and a sense of security amidst the wild expanse of Montana's winter landscape. It was late December when the storm hit. The weather forecast had predicted heavy snowfall, but nothing could have conveyed the sheer ferocity of what we were about to endure. By early evening, the sky had darkened, and the first heavy flakes began to fall, swirling in the howling wind. We hunkered down inside, the warmth of our home a stark contrast to the raging tempest outside. Around midnight, as the storm reached its peak, we heard it, a faint, persistent knocking at our front door. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the knocking continued, steady and insistent. "Who could that be?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. I glanced out the window, squinting against the swirling snow. "Probably just another traveler caught in the storm," I replied, trying to sound reassuring. But then, the knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a soft, eerie tapping. It was as if someone was rhythmically drumming their fingers against the door, desperate and frantic. Linda clutched Lily close, her knuckles white with worry. "Maybe it's someone who needs help," she suggested softly. I hesitated, the storm outside making it nearly impossible to see anything beyond the heavy curtains. "I don't know, Linda. It's dangerous out there." Before I could respond, the knocking resumed, louder this time, accompanied by a faint whispering that seemed to emanate from the very walls of our home. The sound was haunting, a mixture of pleading and desperation that sent shivers down my spine. "Please," the voice seemed to say. "Let us in." Gathering my courage, I moved towards the door, Linda and the kids watching nervously from the living room. I placed a hand on the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before slowly turning it. The door creaked open, revealing a man standing in the blinding white of the storm. He was clad in a heavy, tattered coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf wrapped tightly around his neck. His eyes, however, were unmistakable, hollow and empty, staring directly at us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "Please," he repeated, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I need shelter from the storm." Despite the eerie presence, compassion won over fear. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside to let him enter. "You must be freezing out there." He stepped inside, shaking off the snow that clung to his coat. As he did, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, a chill settling over us that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He looked around, his empty eyes scanning the room before finally resting on Linda and the children. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice strained and hollow. "You don't know what it's like out there." We offered him a blanket and some hot tea, the warmth of our home providing a temporary refuge from the storm. He accepted gratefully, sitting down by the fire, his presence unsettling yet strangely comforting. As the night wore on, we tried to make conversation, but he remained mostly silent, his eyes distant and unfocused. Jake, ever the observant one, couldn't help but notice the way the shadows seemed to cling to him, the corners of the room darkening unnaturally in his presence. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting through the tension. I forced a smile, trying to put my fears aside. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just a traveler needing some help." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man's eyes seemed to bore into us, filled with a sorrow that spoke of untold stories and unfulfilled promises. Around midnight, the storm reached its peak, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls outside. It was then that we heard it, a soft, plaintive whispering that seemed to come from all around us, echoing through the room like a haunting melody. "Don't leave us, don't forget us." The man stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He moved towards the window, his movement stiff and unnatural, as if he were being controlled by an unseen force. Linda and I exchanged worried glances, our fear now turning into genuine concern. "Are you all right?" I asked, taking a step towards him. He turned slowly, his hollow eyes meeting mine. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice filled with dread. "They won't stop until they find me." Before I could respond, the power flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The only light came from the flickering flames of the fireplace, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to twist and move of their own accord. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of despair. Suddenly, the man lunged towards the door, his movements jerky and frenzied. "We have to go," he cried, grabbing my arm with a force that sent me stumbling backward. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Who are you? What do you want?" He looked at me with a mix of fear and desperation. "They're hunting me. They never stop. I can't escape them." Before I could react, the storm outside intensified, the windows rattling violently as the wind howled like a banshee in agony. In a flash, the man released me, his form beginning to shimmer and fade, the edges of his body blurring into the darkness. "No. Please," he begged, his voice echoing through the room. I watched in horror as he vanished, the room returning to normal as the temperature began to rise once more. The whispering ceased, replaced by the soft crackling of the fire and the distant roar of the storm. Shaken, I turned to see Linda and the children staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. "What happened?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't know. He just disappeared." We spent the rest of the night huddled together, the memory of the man's empty eyes and desperate pleas lingering in our minds. The storm eventually subsided, the winds dying down and the snow settling into a peaceful silence. But the experience left an indelible mark on all of us, a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. The next morning, we found footprints outside our cabin, leading into the dense forest that bordered our home. They were large and heavy, the impressions deep in the freshly fallen snow. Confused and fearful, we followed them, hoping to find some explanation for the night's terrifying events. The footprints led us to a secluded grove, the trees surrounding us like silent sentinels. At the center of the grove lay a gnarled old tree, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. Beneath it, partially buried in the snow, was a weathered, forgotten grave marker. The name etched into the stone was familiar, Thomas Weaver, a name I recognized from local history as a soldier who had gone missing during a harsh winter storm decades ago. Tears welled up in my eyes as the realization hit me. The man we had taken in was Thomas Weaver, a soldier whose fate had been lost to the annals of time. His spirit had been trapped in the storm, seeking refuge and unable to move on until his story was remembered. "We have to help him," I said, my voice breaking. "He needs us to remember his sacrifice." Determined to honor his memory, we decided to visit the local historical society the next day, sharing our story and the evidence we had found. The archivist listened intently, her expression grave. "Thomas Weaver was indeed a brave soldier," she confirmed, showing us old records and photographs. "He was last seen during a brutal blizzard, lost in the mountains. His body was never recovered, but stories persisted that his spirit wandered the area, unable to find peace." Armed with this knowledge, we returned to Fort D.A. Russell with a renewed sense of purpose. We spent the next few days documenting the site, gathering information, and speaking with locals who had heard the stories of the wandering spirit. Each night, we returned to our cabin, setting up our cameras and equipment to capture any further supernatural activity. One evening, as we were reviewing the footage, we noticed something strange, a faint, ghostly figure appearing in the background of several shots, always standing near the old tree in the grove. His presence was subtle, but unmistakable, a testament to the restless spirit of Thomas Weaver. Determined to bring closure to his wandering soul, we organized a small memorial at the grove, laying flowers and placing a plaque with his name and story. As we completed the ceremony, a sense of peace settled over the area, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as if the spirits were finally finding the recognition they deserved. That night, as we sat by the fire, the storm rolling in once more, we felt a comforting warmth enveloping our cabin. The whispers had returned, but this time they carried a message of gratitude and peace. Thank you for remembering us. The spirit of Thomas Weaver had been acknowledged, his sacrifice honored, allowing him to finally rest in peace. The storm subsided, leaving behind a serene silence that spoke of resolution and healing. In the years that followed, the story of our encounter at Fort D.A. Russell became a cherished memory, a testament to the enduring power of remembrance and the importance of honoring those who came before us. Silver Ridge remained a place of beauty and resilience, its winters no longer feared but respected as a time of reflection and gratitude. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees and the snow glistens under the moonlight, I catch a fleeting glimpse of glowing eyes watching from the shadows, a silent sentinel ensuring that the balance between the living and the dead remains undisturbed. It's a haunting reminder that some spirits never truly leave, but instead find peace through the recognition and love of those who remember their stories. And so, the legacy of Thomas Weaver and the Carter family lives on, a story of courage, compassion, and the eternal bond between the living and the departed. In the heart of Montana's winter wilderness, the echoes of the past continue to whisper, reminding us all to honor and remember the sacrifices that shape our present and guide our future. Story number 2. Whispers on the White Road. The winter in Colorado is unforgiving. The snow blankets the landscape in a thick, pristine layer, transforming familiar roads into treacherous paths. Loveland Pass, with its winding curves and sheer drops, epitomizes the perilous beauty of the Rocky Mountains. As a delivery driver, I've driven through this pass countless times, navigating its icy bends and snow-covered treks with a mix of trepidation and resilience. But nothing could have prepared me for the night that would etch itself into my memory forever. It was a bitterly cold December evening when I received the urgent call. A package needed to be delivered to a remote cabin nestled deep within the mountains. The storm had already begun to howl, the wind whipping the snow into fierce drifts that obscured visibility. With limited time and no alternative routes, I knew I had to brave Loveland Pass once more. I started my engine, the heater groaning to life as I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck. The darkness outside was punctuated by the faint glow of my headlights piercing through the storm. As I approached the first bend, the road seemed to narrow, the snow piling high against the guardrails. My breath visible in the frigid air, I kept my focus on the treacherous path ahead. Halfway through the pass, my headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white dress that contrasted starkly against the endless expanse of white. She stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the approaching car, and her hands were outstretched in a silent plea for a ride. Heart-pounding, I glanced in the rearview mirror, calculating whether I should stop. The rules were clear, helping strangers on these treacherous roads could mean risking everything. But something about her presence felt different, an unsettling calm that drew me in despite the storm raging outside. I eased the car to a stop, the tires crunching against the snow. The woman approached cautiously, her steps light despite the heavy snowfall. As she reached the car, she stepped into the passenger seat, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I just need a ride home." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Where are you headed?" I asked, glancing back at her through the mirror. She hesitated for a moment before answering, "Just a short distance up the road. My home is a cabin near the old logging trail." The lack of specificity in her answer made me uneasy, but I decided to continue driving. As we made our way further into the pass, the storm intensified, the snowflakes swirling violently around us. The road became narrower, the darkness almost absolute except for the feeble beam of my headlights. I glanced at her, trying to make sense of her presence. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, and her eyes held a vacant stare that sent shivers down my spine. She didn't speak much, her silence amplifying the eerie atmosphere inside the car. About an hour into the journey, we approached a particularly sharp bend. My headlights illuminated a large boulder that had partially slid onto the road, effectively blocking our path. The wind howled louder, and the car seemed to groan under the strain of the storm. "Stop," the woman suddenly demanded, her voice cracking through the tumultuous weather. Startled, I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding against the icy pavement before finally coming to a halt. Confusion clouded my mind. "Why? What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. She looked back at me, her eyes now filled with a strange intensity. We can't go any further. They're coming. Before I could react, a deafening roar echoed through the mountains, the sound of something massive and menacing approaching. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of her warning. The woman, sensing my distress, began to mutter something under her breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Stay inside, she urged, her voice trembling. Don't let them in. Panic surged through me as the storm's fury seemed to intensify, the wind battering the car with renewed ferocity. My mind raced with thoughts of danger, wild animals, lost travelers, or something far more sinister. I looked out the window, half expecting to see a pack of wolves or a lost hiker stumbling through the blinding snow. But what I saw made my blood run cold. A shadowy figure loomed in the distance, its outline barely visible through the thick blizzard. It moved with an unnatural grace, its form shifting and contorting in the swirling snow. The woman beside me gasped, her hand clutching mine tightly. They're hunting us, she whispered, her eyes darting back to the approaching figure. We have to stay safe inside. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Who were they? And why were they after us? The woman's presence, her ghostly appearance, and her urgent warnings all pointed to something beyond my understanding. As the shadowy figure drew closer, the car seemed to be enveloped in a suffocating darkness. The howling wind outside was now punctuated by guttural growls and distant screams, the sounds of anguish and terror blending seamlessly with the storm's fury. I could feel the oppressive weight of unseen eyes watching us, their malevolent intent palpable in the air. Please, the woman pleaded, her voice breaking. Don't let them in. Before I could respond, the door handle rattled violently, the wind howling through the gaps as something tried to force its way into the car. My hands shook uncontrollably as I fumbled with the door locks, the tension inside the vehicle reaching its peak. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to lock the doors, the sound of the locks clicking into place a small victory against the relentless storm. The woman leaned back in her seat, her eyes closing as she sank into a troubled sleep, her breath shallow and irregular. Minutes felt like hours as we sat there, the storm outside showing no signs of abating. The shadowy figure continued its approach, its presence now overwhelming, the air thick with fear and despair. I could feel the temperature inside the car dropping further, the cold seeping into my bones despite the heater's best efforts. Suddenly, the storm shifted, the winds momentarily quieting before erupting with even greater force. The shadowy figure was almost upon us, its form now fully visible through the swirling snow, a towering, spectral entity with hollow eyes that burned like embers in the darkness. It stood at the edge of the road, its gaze fixed on our car with an intensity that paralyzed me. Don't let us stay, the woman murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The creature let out a mournful wail, the sound resonating through the mountains and blending with the storm's fury. I could feel its presence pressing against the car, a malevolent force that seemed to seep into every corner of the vehicle. The fear was suffocating, a tangible entity that threatened to consume me from within. Please, the woman whispered again, her voice filled with sorrow. Remember us. With a surge of adrenaline, I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help. But as I unlocked the screen, my blood ran cold. The number I dialed had no signal, the storm outside blocking any chance of communication. Panic threatened to overwhelm me as I realized we were utterly alone, trapped in the car with an entity bent on keeping us there. The shadowy figure moved closer, its hollow eyes never leaving mine. I could see the anguish etched into its spectral form, a reflection of pain and loss that transcended time and space. The woman beside me opened her eyes, her gaze meeting mine in a moment of silent understanding. We have to remember, she whispered, her voice filled with a haunting clarity. Honor our memories. Let us go. Tears welled up in my eyes as I tried to comprehend her words. The spirits of Loveland Pass were not malevolent out of malice, but driven by a desperate need to be remembered, their stories left untold and their souls restless. Summoning every ounce of courage, I spoke into the darkness. I will remember you. I promise to honor your stories and ensure that your sacrifices are never forgotten. The storm outside began to subside, the winds dying down as if responding to my vow. The shadowy figure paused, its hollow eyes searching mine for the truth in my words. Slowly, it began to fade, the oppressive presence lifting as the spirits found solace in my commitment. The woman beside me opened her eyes, a sense of peace settling over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her form dissipating into the snow like a delicate frost. "We are free now." As the last remnants of the storm faded into the night, I sat back in the driver's seat, the weight of what had transpired settling heavily on my shoulders. The car felt warm again, the chill of fear replaced by a profound sense of relief and responsibility. Morning broke over Loveland Pass with a serene calm, the storm having passed without a trace. The road was clear, the snow glistening under the bright sun, untouched by the chaos of the night before. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see remnants of the spirits, but there was nothing, only the peaceful expanse of the mountains. Driving back to the village, I couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. The woman's presence, the spectral soldier, and the entity that sought to keep us there all pointed to a deeper truth about Loveland Pass, a place where the living and the dead intersected, their stories intertwining in the frozen landscape. Arriving home, I shared the experience with my family, their reactions a mix of skepticism and awe. But deep down, I knew the truth. The spirits of Loveland Pass were real, their stories etched into the very fabric of the mountains, waiting for someone to listen and remember. Determined to honor my promise, I began documenting the history of Loveland Pass, collecting stories from locals and preserving the memories of those who had lost their lives in the unforgiving winter storms. The experience taught me the importance of remembrance, of ensuring that the sacrifices of the past were not forgotten. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the memory of the whisperer on the white road remains vivid in my mind. Loveland Pass continues to be a place of beauty and danger, its snowy paths a reminder of the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. And every winter, as the snow begins to fall and the winds pick up, I can't help but think of the spirits I encountered, silent sentinels guarding their stories, waiting for someone to remember. Sometimes, when the snow falls just right and the moon casts long shadows on the road, I catch a glimpse of a figure standing by the roadside, a faint smile on her lips as she waves in gratitude. It's a comforting sight, a reminder that the spirits of Loveland Pass are at peace, their stories honored and their souls finally free. And so, the whispers on the white road continue to echo through the mountains, a haunting yet beautiful testament to the power of memory and the enduring bond between the living and the departed. Story number 3. The House in the Blizzard. Winter in northern Alaska is a formidable force, capable of transforming the landscape into an impenetrable fortress of ice and snow. The small town of Frost Haven sits quietly on the edge of the wilderness, its residents accustomed to the long, harsh winters that can isolate them for weeks on end. Despite the beauty and serenity the snow brings, it also harbors secrets that few dare to uncover. My name is Jake Carter, and what was meant to be a thrilling adventure with my friends turned into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was late November when Tom, Sarah, and I decided to explore the old Thompson house, an abandoned structure deep within the forest outskirts of Frost Haven. The house had been deserted for decades, its history shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors of hauntings. As high school seniors eager for an unforgettable experience, we were drawn to the challenge of uncovering the truth behind the legends. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and a sturdy backpack filled with supplies, we set out on a frigid Saturday afternoon. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of an impending snowstorm. The air was crisp, each breath visible as we trudged through the thickening snow, the trees bowing under the weight of the first heavy flakes. The forest was eerily silent, the usual sounds of wildlife absent as if the animals had retreated to the safety of their dens in anticipation of the storm. The path to the Thompson house was barely discernible, covered in a fresh layer of snow that muffled our footsteps. After what felt like hours, we finally spotted the dilapidated house through the swirling snow, a skeletal frame of wood and glass, its windows dark and lifeless. As we approached, the wind picked up, howling through the trees and whipping the snow into frenzied patterns. The house loomed before us, its front porch creaking under the strain of the storm. Tom pushed open the heavy wooden door, which groaned in protest, revealing a dark, musty interior. The warmth of the outside world was replaced by an oppressive chill that seemed to seep into our bones. "Let's set up here," Sarah suggested, pointing to the living room where remnants of furniture lay scattered and covered in dust. We unpacked our gear, the beams of our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we began to document the decaying beauty of the house. Hours passed as we explored the various rooms, each one telling a story of abandonment and neglect. The kitchen was particularly haunting, with rusted appliances and broken cabinets standing as silent witnesses to a time long gone. As we moved through the house, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling louder and the snow piling higher against the windows. Around midnight, as we were setting up a makeshift camp in the master bedroom, the storm reached its peak. The wind outside was relentless, battering the house with sheets of ice and snow. We huddled together, sharing stories and trying to keep our spirits high despite the growing unease that settled over us. It was then that we heard it, a faint knocking sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from upstairs. At first, we dismissed it as the wind finding a way through the gaps in the old house, but the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. "Did you guys hear that?" Jake asked, his eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," Tom replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Probably just the storm messing with our minds." But as the night wore on, the knocking persisted, echoing through the empty halls like a haunting reminder of the house's forgotten past. We decided to investigate, our flashlights leading the way up the creaky staircase to the second floor. Each step we took seemed to amplify the sound, the knocking now a relentless presence that demanded our attention. Reaching the top of the stairs, we found ourselves in a long, narrow corridor lined with closed doors. The knocking was now deafening, coming from one particular room at the end of the hallway. Taking a deep breath, we approached the door, the snowstorm outside muffling our footsteps, but not the ominous sounds within. Tom pushed the door open cautiously, the hinges squealing in protest. The room was empty, save for a large, old-fashioned bed in the center. The moonlight streaming through the broken windows cast long shadows across the floor, and the snow had begun to fall from the ceiling, covering the wooden planks beneath our feet. On the walls, we saw the remnants of dried blood, handprints smeared and smeared repeatedly, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. "Run," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We need to get out of here." Before we could react, the door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. The temperature inside the room dropped sharply, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Panic set in as we heard footsteps approaching from the hallway, slow and deliberate, despite the fact that the house was supposed to be empty. "We have to leave," I said, trying to steady my voice as fear clawed at my insides. But as we turned to flee, the door wouldn't budge, locked tight against our frantic attempts to escape. The footsteps grew closer, and the sound of muffled whispers filled the room, their words indistinct but laden with desperation. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a blinding light, and we saw her, an apparition of a woman in a flowing white dress, her eyes hollow and empty, staring directly at us with a sorrowful intensity. She stood at the foot of the bed, her presence both haunting and tragic. "Don't let us stay," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room like a mournful lament. Frozen in fear, we watched as she moved towards us, her movements slow and deliberate. One of my friends, Jake, suddenly disappeared, leaving behind only a single, blood-stained footprint leading out the door. The remaining two of us screamed in terror as the woman reached out to us, her fingers inches from our faces, before she vanished into thin air, leaving us alone once more in the cold, silent room. "Jake!" Tom shouted, but there was no response, only the howling wind and the oppressive silence of the abandoned house. We scrambled to open the door, but it remained stubbornly locked. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of desperate pleas and anguished cries that seemed to come from all around us. With no other option, we were forced to confront the reality of the haunted house and the spirits trapped within its walls. As the storm outside raged on, we huddled together, trying to make sense of the night's terrifying events. The woman's apparition lingered in our minds, her plea a haunting reminder of the sorrow and pain that had been left unresolved within the house. Determined to survive, we decided to band together and find a way to escape, knowing that the spirits would not let us go without a fight. After what felt like an eternity, the storm began to subside, the winds calming and the snow slowing to a gentle fall. We heard a faint knocking once more, this time accompanied by the sound of breaking glass. Summoning every ounce of courage, we approached the door, which was now ajar, the lock seemingly undone by unseen forces. "Come on," I urged, pulling my friends towards the exit. "We need to get out of here." As we stepped into the hallway, the house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as we made our way down the stairs. The footprints that had appeared earlier led us towards the front door, but just as we were about to leave, the apparition of the woman reappeared, standing in the doorway with a sorrowful expression. "I can't leave," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "Stay with us." I turned to face her, the weight of her sorrow pressing down on me. "We have to go," I said softly, my voice breaking. "We didn't mean to disturb you." She watched us for a moment, her eyes pleading for understanding, before she nodded slowly and stepped aside, allowing us to pass. The door swung open effortlessly, and we stepped out into the now calm night, the storm having passed and the snow laying a peaceful blanket over the landscape. As we drove away from the house, the first light of dawn began to break, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered roads. We looked back one last time, the house standing silent and still against the backdrop of the rising sun. The footprints had vanished, leaving no trace of the night's horrors except for the memory etched into our minds. The following day, we returned to town, the ordeal still fresh in our minds. We shared our story with the townspeople, who listened with a mix of skepticism and sympathy. Some believed our account wholeheartedly, recounting their own tales of unexplained phenomena at the Thompson house. Others dismissed it as a product of fear and the isolation that the harsh Alaskan winters can bring. But for us, the truth was undeniable. We had encountered something beyond our understanding, a lingering presence of sorrow and loss that had been trapped within the old house for years. Determined to honor the spirits we had encountered, we decided to document our experience, hoping to shed light on the forgotten stories of those who had been lost to the unforgiving wilderness. As the weeks turned into months, our story gained traction, attracting the attention of paranormal enthusiasts and historians alike. We delved deeper into the history of the Thompson house, uncovering tales of soldiers and civilians who had perished during harsh winters, their lives cut short by the merciless elements. Each new discovery added layers to the haunting narrative, painting a picture of a place where sorrow and loss had left an indelible mark. Despite the attention, we remained grounded in the reality of what we had experienced. The spirits of the Thompson house were real, their presence a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring. Story number 4. The Snow Guard of the Fortress. The first time I heard about the abandoned Frosthaven resort, it was through an old map my grandfather had tucked away in his study. Nestled deep within the rugged terrains of Utah's Rocky Mountains, Frosthaven had once been a thriving winter getaway, renowned for its pristine slopes and luxurious lodges. But 20 years ago, a catastrophic snowslide had claimed the lives of several guests and staff, forcing the resort to shut its doors permanently. Since then, the resort had earned the chilling nickname the Fortress of Snow, a place shrouded in mystery and ghostly legends. As an investigative journalist, I had always been drawn to stories that lay hidden in the shadows, tales of tragedy and the supernatural that begged to be uncovered. Frosthaven Resort seemed like the perfect subject for my next piece, a deep dive into its haunting past and the eerie phenomena that locals whispered about during hushed conversations. With a mix of skepticism and curiosity, I decided to embark on this journey, eager to uncover the truth behind the legends. The drive to Frosthaven was nothing short of treacherous. The winding road snaked through dense forests and steep mountain passes, the landscape a mesmerizing blend of snow-covered pines and jagged peaks. As I approached the resort, the imposing silhouette of the main lodge loomed against the gray sky, its windows dark and lifeless, like empty eyes staring into the abyss. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the faint, lingering aroma of smoke from long-abandoned fireplaces. Parking my old SUV on the gravel driveway, I took a moment to absorb the desolate beauty of the place. The resort was a relic frozen in time, each building a testament to the grandeur that had once thrived here. Overgrown pathways led to various lodges and cabins, their wooden facades weathered by the harsh mountain winters. The centerpiece, the Grand Lodge, stood majestically at the heart of the resort, its once vibrant exterior now faded and crumbling. I grabbed my camera, a sturdy flashlight, and a notebook, essentials for any good investigation, and made my way towards the main lodge. The entrance was marked by a heavy wooden door, its paint peeling and hinges squeaking ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from my flashlight as I navigated through the grand foyer. Dust motes danced in the beam, highlighting the remnants of opulent decor, cracked mirrors, tarnished chandeliers, and furniture covered in thick layers of dust. As I explored the lodge, the eerie silence was broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the occasional creak of the old building settling under the weight of time. Every step I took seemed to echo through the empty halls, a constant reminder that I was alone in this forgotten place. The grandeur of Frosthaven was haunting, a ghostly echo of the laughter and life that had once filled these rooms. Hours passed as I meticulously documented every corner of the lodge, capturing images of the dilapidated interiors and noting down any peculiarities. It wasn't until I reached the lower level that I stumbled upon the most disturbing discovery, a room filled with handcrafted snow dolls. The door to the room was slightly ajar, and a sense of unease settled over me as I pushed it open. The room was small, yet meticulously arranged. Dozens of snow dolls were displayed on shelves and tables, each one unique, intricately crafted with care and attention to detail. What sent chills down my spine was the uncanny resemblance of each doll to real people. Faces were carved with haunting precision, eyes hollow and staring, giving each doll an unsettling lifelike presence. The air in the room was cold, unnaturally so, and a thick layer of frost covered the furniture, making everything appear frozen in time. As I stood there, mesmerized and horrified, a soft knock echoed through the room. My heart raced as I turned, expecting to see another ghostly figure or perhaps a trick of the wind. But the door was closed, and there was no one there. Shaking off the feeling of dread, I decided it was time to move on, but the image of the snow dolls lingered in my mind, their silent, frozen gazes following my every move. I made my way back to the main hall, the storm outside intensifying. The sky had darkened, and thick snowflakes began to blanket the landscape, turning the already treacherous roads into a white maze. The wind howled louder, the sound reverberating through the lodge like the cries of lost souls. I knew it was only a matter of time before the storm would cut off all communication, trapping me within the fortress of snow. Setting up camp in what used to be the grand dining hall, I lit a small fire in the old fireplace, the warmth a stark contrast to the cold that seemed to seep into every corner of the lodge. I sat down with my notebook, reviewing the day's findings and contemplating the eerie presence of the snow dolls. As the night grew darker, the storm outside raged on, the wind howling like a beast unleashed, the snow piling higher against the windows. Around midnight, just as exhaustion began to take hold, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic knocking at the window. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed my flashlight and peered into the swirling snowstorm outside. Through the blur of white, I saw her, a woman dressed in a flowing white gown, her hair disheveled and face pale from the cold. She stood by the window, her eyes fixed on me with a haunting emptiness, her hands outstretched as if begging for something I couldn't comprehend. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the storm's fury. She remained silent, her eyes never leaving mine. As I watched, her form began to shimmer, the edges blurring and blending with the snow. Suddenly, she vanished, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room, the echo of her presence lingering like a ghostly whisper. Shaken, I tried to convince myself that it was a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by the storm and the isolation. But deep down, I knew there was something more sinister at play, something that wanted to be noticed, to be remembered. I decided to investigate further, hoping to find answers that could explain the eerie occurrences. Venturing into the basement, I discovered old records and personal journals left behind by the resort staff. Pages were filled with entries about the snowslide, the lives lost, and the subsequent decline of Frosthaven. One journal in particular caught my attention, a detailed account by a woman named Eleanor, who had been one of the resort's artists responsible for creating the snow dolls. Eleanor's entries were poignant, filled with sorrow and a sense of helplessness. She wrote about how the snow dolls were meant to honor the guests who had perished in the disaster, each one representing a soul lost to the unforgiving storm. But her tone grew increasingly desperate, hinting at a dark force that had emerged after the snowslide, one that haunted the resort and refused to let the memories fade. As I delved deeper into Eleanor's writings, I began to piece together the tragic history of Frosthaven. The snowslide had not only taken lives, but had awakened something ancient and malevolent within the mountains. The snow dolls, once symbols of remembrance, had become conduits for restless spirits, trapping their essence within the handcrafted forms. Determined to uncover the truth and lay the spirits to rest, I decided to conduct a séance, hoping to communicate directly with the entities that haunted the fortress of snow. Setting up my equipment in the dining hall, I lit candles and arranged the snow dolls in a circle, the flickering flames casting long, wavering shadows across the room. Taking a deep breath, I began to chant the incantations I had found in Eleanor's journal, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The room grew colder, the candles flickering wildly as the storm outside raged on. As I reached the climax of the seance, the air seemed to thicken, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Suddenly, a deafening silence fell over the lodge, the storm's fury momentarily silenced. The snow dolls began to glow with an eerie light, their eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. A figure materialized in the center of the circle, a man dressed in military garb, his face contorted with rage and sorrow. "Why do you disturb us?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the room like a death knell. I stood my ground, meeting his hollow gaze. "We want to honor your memory. Let you rest in peace." The man's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained filled with anguish. "You cannot forget us. We are bound to this place by your memories. Please," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Let us remember your stories, not trap you here forever." He looked at me, his form wavering like smoke. "Remember us, and we will find peace. Help us remember our lives, our sacrifices." With renewed determination, I vowed to share their stories, to ensure that the memories of those lost would live on in a way that honored their lives without binding their spirits to the resort. The man's figure began to fade, the snow dolls glowed dimming as the atmosphere lightened, the oppressive presence lifting from the room. As the last remnants of the seance dissipated, the storm outside began to subside, the winds calming and the snow settling into a peaceful silence. Exhausted but relieved, I knew that I had made a difference, that the spirits of Frosthaven had been given a chance to find peace through remembrance. The following day, I left Frosthaven with a heavy heart but a sense of purpose. The story I had uncovered was one of tragedy and resilience, of lives lost and memories preserved. As I drove away from the Fortress of Snow, the resort stood silent against the backdrop of the mountains, its haunting legacy now part of my own. In the months that followed, I published my findings, the story of Frosthaven Resort resonating with readers and sparking conversations about the thin veil between the living and the dead. People were moved by the tale of Eleanor and the Snow Dolls, their sorrowful stories a poignant reminder of the cost of nature's wrath and the enduring power of remembrance. But even as the accolades poured in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of Frosthaven were still watching, their silent vigil a testament to the lives that had been lost. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right and the snow falls in delicate patterns, I catch a glimpse of a white gown in the distance, a haunting reminder that some stories never truly end, they linger, etched into the fabric of the world, waiting to be remembered. And so, the legend of the Snow Guard of the Fortress of Snow continues to live on, a story of tragedy, memory, and the eternal bond between the living and the departed. In the heart of Utah's winter wilderness, the echoes of Frosthaven's past whisper through the snow, a silent tribute to those who had been lost and the memories that keep their spirits alive. Story number 5. Black Shadow on a White Night. The night air was biting cold as our SUV hummed steadily along the endless stretch of Wyoming's snow-covered plains. My family and I had decided to make the drive home from Denver, hoping to beat the early winter chill that had settled in. The vast expanse of white under the dim glow of our headlights felt both serene and foreboding, a stark reminder of nature's indifferent grandeur. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Lily, my 16-year-old sister, who was nestled in the back seat, her breath slow and even as she slept. My mother sat beside me, eyes fixed on the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. My father, always the stoic one, drove with a calm determination that belied the anxiety etched into his features. We had faced many storms together, but this night felt different, charged with an uneasy tension that I couldn't quite place. The wind howled outside, whipping snowflakes against the windows, turning them into a blurry canvas of white. Visibility was poor, and the road seemed to stretch on forever, disappearing into the darkness ahead. We were halfway through our journey when I first noticed it, a shadow standing motionless at the roadside, barely discernible against the snowstorm. At first, I dismissed it as a large deer or perhaps a moose, common sights in these parts. But as the car drew closer, the shape became more defined. It wasn't an animal. It was a towering figure, unnaturally tall, with limbs that seemed too long, reaching out like the branches of a dead tree. Its eyes glowed with an eerie luminescence, piercing through the darkness like two beacons of malevolence. "Dad, do you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. My father glanced in the mirror, his calm demeanor faltering for just a split second. "Probably just a deer, kiddo." Let's keep driving. But as we passed, something shifted. The figure remained rooted to the spot, but a palpable sense of dread filled the air. My mother's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It was as if the very air around us had thickened, the cold seeping into our bones with an unnatural intensity. We continued driving, the SUV's headlights cutting through the storm, but then I saw it again, a movement out of the corner of my eye. The shadow had changed. It was now following us, keeping pace with our vehicle despite the treacherous conditions. My father increased the speed, hoping to put some distance between us and whatever this thing was, but the figure matched our pace effortlessly, its movements almost fluid despite the frozen landscape. "Why isn't it leaving?" I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. My father didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused intently on the road, his knuckles white as he maneuvered the car through the blinding snow. The figure's presence was growing more oppressive, its glowing eyes never wavering from our path. I could feel a chill that wasn't just from the cold, something deeper, something ancient and malevolent. Without warning, the shadow began to run alongside the car, its long limbs propelling it forward with terrifying speed. The sound of its footsteps echoed in the night, a hollow, metallic rhythm that seemed to pierce the very fabric of our reality. My mother clutched her seat, her face pale with fear, while Lily stirred in the back, sensing the tension that had enveloped us. "Stay calm," my father said, his voice tight. "We just need to get through this storm." But as we sped up, the shadow didn't falter. Instead, it seemed to grow larger, more defined, as if drawing strength from the darkness surrounding us. My pulse raced, and I glanced again in the mirror. The figure's eyes were now directly behind us, an unblinking gaze that felt like it was searching for something, or someone. Suddenly, without warning, the shadow vanished. The car slowed, and an uneasy silence settled over us, broken only by the howling wind and the crunch of tires on snow. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, but the relief was short-lived. On the windshield, where the shadow had stood moments before, there was now a dark, smeared handprint, impossibly large and out of place against the pristine white glass. My mother pointed to it, her voice trembling. "Look, someone touched the windshield." I leaned forward, trying to wipe away the mark, but it was like trying to erase ink from paper. The handprint remained, dark and indelible, as if something had actually reached out and left its mark on us. My father sighed, frustration and fear mingling in his expression. "We need to keep moving," he said firmly. "Whatever that was, we can't let it stop us." But driving felt different now. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind a potential threat. The road ahead felt more treacherous, the snow deeper, as if the storm itself was conspiring against us. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what we were experiencing. Was it a hallucination brought on by the cold? A trick of the light? Or something far more sinister? As we pressed on, the SUV seemed to be moving in slow motion. The world outside was a blur of white and black, the storm's fury unabated. Then, out of nowhere, the shadow reappeared, this time in front of us, blocking the road. My father slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just inches from the figure. The shadow loomed over us, its eyes glowing brighter, almost burning with an inner fire. Time seemed to stand still. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, drowning out the storm. My mother screamed, clutching Lily tightly, while my father stared down at the figure, his face a mask of fear and determination. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. There was no response, only the cold wind whipping around us. The shadow remained silent, its presence oppressive and unyielding. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it started to move, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. It followed us relentlessly, its long arms reaching out as if trying to grasp the vehicle. We had no choice but to flee. My father gunned the engine, and the SUV lurched forward, tires spinning on the icy road. The shadow sprinted alongside us, its footsteps now a deafening clatter against the snow. Panic set in as we navigated the treacherous turns, the storm showing no signs of relenting. The darkness felt alive, each shadow a potential threat, each gust of wind a possible ambush. Suddenly, the shadow split into multiple forms, dozens of black figures emerging from the storm, surrounding us. It was as if the entire night had come alive with these dark entities, their eyes fixed on us with unholy intent. My mother screamed, the sound lost in the cacophony of the storm, while Lily cried quietly in the back seat. Desperation took hold. My father tried to find a way out, but the road seemed to twist and turn, leading us deeper into the heart of the storm. The black figures closed in, their presence suffocating, their intent clear. We were not welcome here. Just when it felt like all hope was lost, a blinding light pierced through the darkness. The storm seemed to hesitate, the wind's fury abating as a beam of pure white light illuminated the road ahead. The shadow figures recoiled, their forms flickering and fading under the intense brightness. "Keep going," my father shouted over the noise, pushing the SUV toward the light. The figures retreated, dissolving into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. The road opened up, and the storm began to lessen, the snow slowing to a gentle fall. We sped forward, the oppressive weight of fear slowly lifting as we left the darkness behind. After what felt like an eternity, we saw the faint outlines of our hometown emerging from the blizzard. Relief washed over us as the lights of houses and street lamps came into view, a beacon of safety in the midst of the nightmare. My mother let out a shaky laugh, tears of relief streaming down her face, while Lily clung to me, her eyes wide with fear. We finally pulled into our driveway, the SUV sliding to a stop on the icy ground. My father turned off the engine, and silence enveloped us once more, the storm now just a distant memory. We sat there for a moment, the reality of what had transpired sinking in. The black handprint on the windshield was the only tangible proof of our ordeal, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had pursued us through the night. As we settled into the warmth of our home, the events of that night replayed in my mind like a horror film. What had we encountered out there on the frozen plains? Was it a spirit, a demon, or something beyond our understanding? The questions lingered, unanswered, as the handprint remained, a silent sentinel on the windshield. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a terrifying experience. Yet, every time I looked in the mirror or glanced at my reflection, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. The memory of those glowing eyes haunted my dreams, and the snow-covered plains seemed to call out to me in the dead of night. I began researching the area, delving into local legends and folklore, searching for any mention of the black shadow we had encountered. It turned out that we weren't the first to see it. Stories spoke of a malevolent spirit, a lost soul condemned to roam the plains forever, seeking something it could never attain. Some believed it was the restless spirit of a man who had perished in a blizzard, his soul twisted by the unforgiving winter. One evening, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to visit the site where we had first encountered the shadow. The memory was vivid, the endless snow, the oppressive darkness, the glowing eyes that had chilled me to the core. As I drove to the location, the sky was clear, the moon casting a silvery light over the pristine landscape. The serenity was deceptive, hiding the terror that lurked beneath. Parking a safe distance away, I ventured out into the cold, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the barren grass. I stood there, staring into the darkness where the shadow had appeared, my breath visible in the frigid air. "Are you here?" I called out, my voice echoing back at me. Silence. Minutes turned into hours, and I found nothing but the vast, empty plains. Yet, deep down, I knew that the shadow was still out there, watching, waiting. The experience had changed me, leaving an indelible mark on my soul. I realized that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, that the darkness held secrets we were never meant to uncover. Back home, the handprint on the windshield remained, a constant reminder of that fateful night. It seemed to absorb the light, refusing to fade, as if the shadow was claiming a part of us, leaving its mark to ensure we never forgot. Sometimes, when the night was especially quiet, I could swear I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside, the echo of those glowing eyes watching from the darkness. The incident brought our family closer, binding us with a shared experience of fear and survival. Yet, beneath the surface, a lingering unease persisted. We had escaped the immediate threat, but the shadow had left its imprint on our lives, a haunting presence that would never fully leave us. Years later, the memory still lingered, a ghostly reminder of the night we encountered the black shadow on a white night. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown, and the darkness that lurks just beyond our perception. The plains of Wyoming, with their endless snow and silent expanse, held secrets that were better left undisturbed, stories that whispered through the wind, waiting for the next unwitting traveler to stumble upon them. In the quiet moments before sleep, I sometimes found myself staring into the darkness, wondering if the shadow was still out there, watching, waiting for another chance to reach out from the abyss. And as the snow continued to fall outside my window, blanketing the world in white, I couldn't help but feel that the shadow was never truly gone, that it remained a part of the night, forever haunting the frozen plains of Wyoming. Story number 6. The Silent Storm at Donner Pass. The night air was unnervingly still as our group of friends descended the slopes of Donner Pass, California. We had planned this skiing trip for months, eager to escape the hustle of city life and embrace the serene, snow-covered wilderness. The pass, infamous for the tragic Donner Party expedition in the 19th century, added a macabre allure to our adventure. Little did we know, the shadows of the past were about to converge with our present in the most terrifying way. I was the last to arrive at the rendezvous point, my breath visible in the frigid air as I trudged through the freshly fallen snow. My friends, Jake, Emily, Sarah, and Matt, were already gathered near the base of the mountain, their laughter echoing against the silent expanse. We were a close-knit group, bonded by years of shared experiences and a mutual love for the outdoors. Tonight, however, an unspoken tension lingered among us, a premonition I couldn't quite shake. "Ready to hit the slopes?" Jake called out, his grin wide and infectious. He was always the leader, the one who pushed us into new adventures without a second thought. Emily and Sarah nodded eagerly, while Matt adjusted his goggles, a hint of nervousness flickering in his eyes. As we began our ascent, the sky darkened rapidly, the cheerful twilight giving way to an ominous gloom. The weather forecast had predicted a mild snowfall, but nothing prepared us for the sudden shift. The wind picked up, howling through the pines, and snowflakes began to fall with increasing ferocity. Visibility dropped, and the once welcoming trails became treacherous and obscured. "Looks like we might have to head back," Sarah suggested, her voice tinged with concern. But Jake was undeterred. "We're almost to the peak. Just a bit further." Reluctantly, we continued, the thrill of the challenge momentarily overpowering our apprehension. The temperature plummeted, and the snow seemed to press in on us from all sides, a relentless, white curtain that muffled our surroundings. It wasn't long before the wind transformed from a mere annoyance to a powerful force, battering us with icy gusts that threatened to throw us off balance. By the time we reached the summit, the blizzard had fully unleashed its wrath. The sky was a swirling mass of dark clouds, and the snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, reducing visibility to mere feet. Panic set in as we realized the severity of the situation. We were miles from the nearest shelter, and the storm showed no signs of abating. "We need to find shelter, now," Emily insisted, her voice cracking with fear. We scrambled down the mountain, seeking any sign of refuge. After what felt like an eternity battling the elements, we stumbled upon an old cabin, its weathered exterior barely visible through the blinding snow. The cabin seemed abandoned, windows boarded up and door hanging loosely on its hinges. Yet, desperation drove us forward. Inside, the air was frigid and stale, the wooden floors creaking under our weight as we huddled together for warmth. Matt found a stack of old firewood in the corner, and we managed to light a feeble fire, its flickering flames casting long, eerie shadows against the walls. As we settled in, the howling wind outside began to die down, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against the cabin's walls. It was then that we started to hear the whispers, faint at first, barely audible over the crackling fire. "We're hungry. Join us." The voices seemed to come from all directions, their tones pleading and desperate. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jake nodded, trying to mask his own unease with bravado. "Probably just the wind playing tricks on us." But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent as the night wore on. Shadows danced along the walls, taking on shapes that seemed almost human. Emily clutched her blanket tighter, her knuckles white with tension. "I don't like this. We should leave." Before anyone could respond, a chilling sight unfolded before us. Through a gap in the boarded-up window, I saw faint, ghostly figures moving around the cabin's perimeter. They were translucent, their forms blurry and indistinct, but their presence was unmistakably human. One of them, a tall figure with hollow eyes, seemed to be beckoning us. "Did you see that?" Matt gasped, his face paling. Jake approached the window cautiously, squinting through the snow. "It's just shadows, right?" But as he reached out to touch the glass, a sudden coldness enveloped him. His hand froze midair, and his body went rigid. Without warning, Jake staggered back, eyes wide with terror. "We need to go. Now." We didn't need further encouragement. Rushing for the door, we found it was no longer hanging open. It was as if an unseen force had sealed us inside. Panic surged through us as the whispers intensified, now accompanied by the sound of footsteps crunching on the snow outside. "We're trapped," Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. "Someone's out there." Desperation turned to horror as one by one, we began to vanish. Sarah was the first to disappear, her scream cut short as she was engulfed by the shadows. Then Matt, his disappearance marked by a flicker of light and a haunting wail. Only Emily and I remained, our breaths shallow, hearts pounding in our chests. "Jake's gone," I whispered, the reality of our situation sinking in. "We're not alone here." The cabin seemed to come alive with malevolent energy. Objects moved on their own, the fire flickered wildly, and the temperature plummeted to unbearable lows. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling command: "Stay with us forever." I knew we had to escape, but the storm had worsened, and the snow piled high against the windows. Finding another way out proved futile, every exit blocked by the relentless blizzard. The apparitions pressed in closer, their hollow eyes filled with sorrow and rage, a tragic echo of the past. In a last-ditch effort, I searched the cabin for anything that could aid our escape. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the old door hinges, finally managing to pry the door open just enough for a sliver of light to pierce the darkness. Summoning every ounce of strength, I pushed the door wide and dragged Emily outside into the storm. The wind tore at us, threatening to pull us back, but we forced ourselves forward, stumbling through the deep snow. The cabin loomed behind us, its windows now glowing with an eerie light as if bidding us farewell, or perhaps warning us of the fate that awaited those who dared to disturb its silence. We ran blindly, the storm disorienting us further, until the night began to give way to the faint hues of dawn. Exhausted and frostbitten, we finally reached the edge of the pass, where the storm had begun to abate. The sun rose slowly, casting a pale light over the devastated landscape, revealing the full extent of the blizzard's fury. Looking back, the cabin had vanished, swallowed by the snow and the shadows of history. We were alone, save for the lingering sense of loss and the haunting whispers that seemed to follow us even in the daylight. The footprints we had left in the snow led back to the cabin, no matter how far we walked, a cruel reminder that we had not truly escaped. Days later, the authorities found us wandering the pass, delirious and broken from exposure. We were taken to the nearest town, our story met with skepticism and concern. But the truth was etched into our minds, an unshakable memory of the night the past reached out to claim us. In the years that followed, the memory of that night remained a dark shadow over our lives. Emily never fully recovered, her spirit forever marked by the horrors we had endured. I often find myself drawn back to Donner Pass, the site of our ordeal, feeling an inexplicable pull to uncover the secrets that lie beneath its snow-covered facade. One cold winter night, driven by a need for closure, I returned to the pass alone. The moon cast a silvery glow over the landscape, the snow pristine and untouched, as if the horrors of the past were mere figments of our imagination. Yet, as I stood there, the whispers began anew, soft and insistent, echoing through the silent night. "Join us!" The voices called, familiar and haunting. I felt a chill run down my spine, the same oppressive fear that had gripped us years ago. Shadows began to form around me, indistinct figures emerging from the darkness. I realized then that some places hold onto their tragedies, unwilling to let go of the souls lost to time. As the apparitions closed in, their hollow eyes staring into mine, I understood the true legacy of Donner Pass. It wasn't just a place of historical tragedy, but a nexus where the past and present collided, where restless spirits yearned for peace that would never come. The storm had not just been a natural disaster, it was a veil, a thin barrier between our world and the tormented souls that roamed the paths, forever seeking release. In that moment, surrounded by the silent storm and the ghostly figures, I felt the weight of their sorrow and the depth of their despair. I knew I was not meant to stay, to join them in their eternal vigil. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I turned and fled into the night, the whispers fading behind me as the first light of dawn began to break. Back in the safety of my home, I try to put the events behind me, but the memory lingers like a shadow. Donner Pass remains a place of mystery and fear, a testament to the enduring pain of those who never found peace. And sometimes, on quiet winter nights, I can still hear their whispers, carried on the wind, reminding me that some storms never truly end, they simply wait for the next lost soul to heed their call.